The sun was beating down on the asphalt of Los Angeles, the kind of heat that makes the air shimmer and dance. It was the middle of the 1990s, a time when Hollywood was buzzing with energy, money, and big egos. For an actor, this town could be a paradise or a jungle, and often it was both at the same time. Keanu Reeves sat behind the wheel of his car, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter than usual. He wasn't driving a flashy limousine or a sports car that screamed movie star. He was just a guy in a regular vehicle, heading toward a meeting that could change the entire direction of his life. He pulled up to the gates of a major studio lot. The guard checked his name on the list and gave a nod, the heavy metal gate sliding open with a slow groan. As he drove through the lot, passing giant sound stages and trailers, he felt a familiar knot tightening in his stomach. He had been in this business for a while. He had made people laugh in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. He had made hearts race in Point Break and Speed. He was famous, yes. He was recognized on the street. But there was a voice inside him, a quiet but persistent voice, that told him he hadn't really shown the world who he was yet. He felt like people saw him as the dude character, the surfer, the goofy time traveler, not the serious artist he knew he could be. Today was about changing that. He was there to fight for a project called The Matrix. It was a script that had blown his mind the moment he read it. It was complex, philosophical, and visually stunning in a way that movies hadn't been before. But the studio bosses, the people holding the money, were nervous. They didn't get it. They thought it was too dark, too weird, and too smart for a summer blockbuster. Keanu parked his car and walked toward the main administration building. The air conditioning inside hit him like a wave of ice, cooling the sweat on his forehead. He walked down long hallways lined with movie posters from past hits and forgotten flops. The walls were painted a stark, sterile white, and the carpet was thick enough to swallow the sound of his footsteps. It felt less like a place where art was made and more like a place where math was done, calculations of risk versus reward. He reached the reception desk and told the secretary he was there. She pointed a manicured finger toward a plush waiting area. He sat down on a leather sofa that was so soft he felt like he was sinking into quicksand. He picked up a magazine but didn't really look at it. His legs started bouncing up and down nervously. Across from him, other actors sat in silence, clutching their own scripts, trying to look confident while secretly terrified. It was the waiting room of dreams, but it was also the waiting room of broken dreams. After what felt like an eternity, a heavy wooden door opened and a harried assistant poked her head out. "Mr. Reeves, she will see you now." Keanu stood up, smoothed down his shirt, and took a deep breath. He walked into the office, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. This was the domain of a high-powered studio executive. We will call her the executive. She was the kind of woman who ate careers for breakfast. She sat behind a desk that was the size of a small aircraft carrier, piled high with papers, scripts, and contracts. The window behind her offered a panoramic view of the lot, reminding everyone who entered that she was the one with the power. She didn't stand up when he entered. She didn't smile. She just kept reading a document in front of her, her pen scratching aggressively against the paper. Keanu stood there for a moment, feeling awkward, before gently clearing his throat. "Thanks for seeing me," he said, his voice soft and polite. The executive sighed, a long, dramatic sound that signaled she was already bored. She finally looked up, her eyes sharp and assessing, looking him up and down as if he were a product on a shelf that was past its expiration date. "Sit down," she said, her voice flat. "Make it quick. I have a lunch meeting in 10 minutes. Keanu sat in the chair opposite her. It was hard and uncomfortable, clearly designed to make visitors feel small. I wanted to talk to you about the Matrix, Keanu began, leaning forward slightly. He needed her to see what he saw. I really believe in this script. The Wachowskis, the writers, they have this incredible vision. It's not just an action movie. It's about reality, about consciousness. It's something the audience hasn't seen before. The executive dropped her pen on the desk with a clatter. She leaned back in her leather chair and crossed her arms, a look of pure skepticism on her face. Keanu, she said, using his name like a warning. Look at the numbers. Do you know how much this movie is going to cost? The special effects alone are a nightmare. We are talking about slowing down bullets. We are talking about kung fu in the air. It's expensive. It's risky. High risk, high reward, Keanu said gently. But if it works, it changes everything. If it works, she snapped, cutting him off. But it probably won't. People want simple stories. They want explosions and car chases. They don't want philosophy. They don't want to think about whether they are living in a computer simulation. Keanu didn't back down. He knew this was his shot. I think they do. I think audiences are smarter than we give them credit for. And I know I can do this role. I can do the action, sure, but I can also handle the emotional weight. I'm ready to show people what I can really do. He was pouring his heart out. He was telling her that he was tired of being typecast. He was telling her that he wanted to work harder than he had ever worked before. But the executive wasn't listening to his passion. She was looking at her watch. She looked at him, her expression hardening. She saw the guy from Bill and Ted. She saw the guy who said whoa a lot. She didn't see a serious dramatic actor. To her, he was just a lucky face who had gotten a few big breaks and now thought he was a filmmaker. You know what your problem is? She asked, though it wasn't really a question. You don't know your place. You are an action star. You are a comedy guy. You are not the person to lead a groundbreaking sci-fi masterpiece. You are going to confuse the audience. You are going to cost the studio a fortune. Keanu felt a sting of embarrassment, but he tried one last time. Just read the script again. Look at the storyboards. It's special. The executive stood up abruptly. The meeting was over. She had heard enough. She walked around the desk, standing over him, using her height and her position to intimidate him. The power dynamic in the room was suffocating. She pointed a manicured finger toward the door. I don't have time for your little dreams, she said, her voice rising. I have a studio to run. I have shareholders to answer to. And I am not going to let you and your weird little sci-fi script sink my quarter. You are delusional if you think this movie is going to make a dime. It is going to be a catastrophe. And when it fails, and it will fail, I am not going to be the one who signed the check. Keanu looked up at her. He didn't get angry. He didn't shout back. That wasn't his style. He just felt a deep, settling sadness. This was the wall he kept hitting. The people who controlled the industry didn't believe in art, they believed in safe bets. And the Matrix was anything but safe. Get lost. She suddenly snapped, her voice echoing off the glass walls of the office. Get out of my office and take that ridiculous script with you. Don't come back until you have a project that actually makes sense. The words hung in the air, sharp and cruel. Get lost. Keanu slowly stood up. He didn't argue. He didn't try to shake her hand. he realized that there was nothing he could say to change her mind. Her mind was made of stone. "Okay," he said quietly. "Thank you for your time." He turned and walked toward the door. As he reached for the handle, he heard her muttering behind him, already on the phone with someone else, dismissing him from her mind the second he was out of her sight. He walked out into the hallway, the heavy door clicking shut behind him, sealing him out of her world. The hallway felt different now. The air seemed thicker. He walked past the other waiting actors, and for a second, he felt like they could smell the rejection on him. He kept his head down, walking quickly toward the exit. He pushed through the glass doors of the building and stepped back out into the California sun. The heat hit him again, but this time it didn't make him shimmer. It just made him sweat. He walked to his car, the sound of the studio lot golf carts buzzing, distant megaphones barking orders fading into the background. He sat in the driver's seat for a long time without turning the key. He looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror. He looked tired. He looked defeated. The executive's words were ringing in his ears. Delusional. Ridiculous. A catastrophe. She had told him to get lost. She had told him he was going to ruin the studio. She had looked right through him as if he were nothing. But as he sat there, a small fire began to burn deep inside him. It wasn't a fire of anger or revenge. It was a fire of determination. He thought about the script. He thought about the character of Neo, the hero who discovers his entire life is a lie. The executive thought the story was too difficult. She thought people were stupid. Keanu turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life. He put the car in gear, but he didn't drive away immediately. He looked back at the tall, gleaming building where the executive sat in her air-conditioned tower, counting money she hadn't even earned yet. He knew something she didn't. He knew that magic happened when people took risks. He knew that the best stories were the ones that scared you a little bit. He pulled out of the parking spot and drove toward the exit gate. The guard raised the handrail and waved him through. As he merged onto the busy highway, the city sprawling out in front of him, he made a silent promise to himself. He wasn't going to give up. If the big studio wouldn't back him, he would find another way. If they wouldn't take the risk, he would take it for them. The executive had said the movie would fail. She had screamed in his face to get lost. She was sure of it. She was the expert. She was the powerful one. Keanu gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He didn't know it then, and neither did she, but the universe was about to play a very funny trick on both of them. The script she had thrown in the trash, the actor she had humiliated, and the idea she had mocked were all sitting on a powder keg ready to explode. It wasn't just a movie anymore. It was a challenge. He drove on into the traffic, the rejection stinging like a fresh cut, but his mind was already working, already planning, already fighting for the dream. He was not lost. He was just getting started. The Hollywood sun had gone down, but the heat inside the meeting room was rising. It was a different kind of heat than the outside weather. It was the sweaty, nervous heat of people gambling with millions of dollars. Keanu was back in the building, but this time he wasn't facing the angry executive who had told him to get lost. He was sitting in a smaller, dimmer room with the producers and the money men. These were the people who had to actually write the checks for the movie. The air in the room smelled like stale coffee and expensive cologne. On the table in front of them lay a stack of papers that was thick enough to stop a bullet. This was the budget for The Matrix. It was terrifying. The main producer, a tired-looking man with circles under his eyes, rubbed his temples. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He tapped a finger on the top page of the stack. "Keanu," the producer said, his voice heavy with worry. "We have a problem. Actually, we have a few problems. The studio loves the script, but they are terrified of the price tag. They want to make this movie, but they want to make it cheap. They want us to cut $10 million from the budget by tomorrow morning, or they are going to pull the plug." Keanu listened quietly. He was leaning forward in his chair, his elbows on his knees. He knew exactly what cutting $10 million meant. It meant the bullet time effect, the cool trick where the camera spins around while the actor is frozen in mid-air. It meant the Hong Kong-style kung fu training. It meant all the things that made the script special. If they cut the budget, the movie wouldn't be The Matrix anymore. It would just be another generic action movie with cheap effects. "You can't cut the effects," Keanu said softly. "The effects are the story. If you take those away, there is no movie. The whole point is that the world is not real. You have to show that." "I know that," the producer said, throwing his hands up. "You know that. The Wachowskis know that. But the guys in the suits, they just see numbers. They see a risk. They look at you, and they see a guy who does action movies. They don't see a guy who can carry a deep, philosophical sci-fi epic. They want a discount. They want us to hire a cheaper actor, or they want you to take a pay cut so big it's insulting." There was a long silence in the room. The other people in the meeting, a few writers and assistant producers, looked down at their hands. Nobody wanted to be the one to say it out loud. In Hollywood, talking about money was messy. It was awkward. It was usually the thing that ended friendships and ruined careers. An agent usually handled this. An agent would scream and yell and threaten to walk out. But Keanu didn't have an agent in that room. It was just him. Keanu looked around the table. He saw the fear in their eyes. They wanted to make this movie so badly it hurt. They had the vision, but they didn't have the leverage. He realized that the power was sitting right in his lap. He was the movie star. He was the name that could sell the tickets to the studio. If he walked away, the project died. If he stayed, he had the power to save it. He thought about the executive in the big office. She had told him he was delusional. She had told him to get lost. She thought he was just a dude who got lucky. This was his chance to prove her wrong, not with words, but with actions. But actions have a cost. "If I take the cut," Keanu asked, his voice steady, "can we keep the budget for the visual effects? Can we make the movie exactly the way the directors want it?" The producer looked up, surprised. "What did you say?" "If I give back my salary," Keanu repeated, speaking slowly. "If I take less money, maybe no money up front, can we use that cash to pay for the cameras and the effects? Can we buy the time we need to make it right?" The room went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. In a town famous for greed, this was something nobody heard every day. Actors held out for more money. Actors demanded private jets and trailers the size of houses. They didn't offer to give their salaries back to the studio so the movie could look better. "Keanu," the producer said, lowering his voice. "We are talking about millions of dollars. Your upfront fee is huge. If you slash it, you are betting on yourself. You only get paid if the movie makes money. If the movie flops, you worked for free for a year." Keanu nodded. He understood the risk perfectly. It was a massive gamble. If The Matrix turned out to be a mess, or if the audience hated it like the executive predicted, he would lose a fortune. he would have given away a year of his life and millions of dollars for nothing. But sitting there, looking at the worried faces of the people who believed in the project, he didn't care about the money. He cared about the art. He cared about the character. He wanted to be Neo so badly he could taste it. He thought about the feeling of reading the script for the first time, the way his heart had raced. Some things are worth more than money. Some chances only come once in a lifetime. Do it, Keanu said. Draw up the papers. I'll take the cut. Give the money to the production. Just promise me we won't make a cheap movie. The producer looked at him for a long moment, completely stunned. Then, a slow smile spread across his tired face. He nodded. I promise. We are going to make the best movie we possibly can. The tension in the room broke. It was like a storm had passed. Everyone started talking at once, excitedly buzzing about the scenes they could now afford to shoot. The energy in the room shifted from hopeless defeat to electric hope. Keanu sat back in his chair, a feeling of calm settling over him. He had just made the biggest bet of his life, and he felt good about it. He wasn't doing it for the fame. He wasn't doing it for the praise. He was doing it because he believed in the story, and he wanted to protect it from the people who only cared about the bottom line. Over the next few weeks, the machinery of Hollywood began to grind into motion. The paperwork was signed, sealed, and delivered. The studio bosses were shocked. They couldn't believe an actor would voluntarily take a pay cut to fund the special effects. It changed the way they looked at the project. They realized that if the star was willing to bet his own salary on it, maybe there was something to this weird script after all. But even with the money sorted, the shadow of doubt still hung over the production. The executive, the one who had screamed at him, was still in her office up the hill. She heard about the deal, of course. News traveled fast in the studio. She probably laughed when she heard it. She probably thought he was an idiot for giving away his money. She was still convinced the movie was going to be a disaster. Keanu didn't care what she thought anymore. He was too busy to care. The decision was made, and there was no turning back now. He had traded financial security for creative freedom, and he was ready to pay the price. A few weeks later, Keanu found himself standing on the tarmac at the airport, a heavy duffel bag over his shoulder. He was about to board a plane to Sydney, Australia. That was where they were going to shoot the movie. It was a long way from Hollywood, a long way from the fancy offices and the angry studio bosses. The wind was blowing, tugging at his jacket. He looked around at the crew members loading cameras and equipment onto the cargo plane. Everyone was busy, focused on their jobs, but there was a buzz of excitement in the air. They were going on an adventure. They were going to try something new. As he handed his ticket to the flight attendant, Keanu took one last look at the city skyline in the distance. The tall buildings gleamed in the sun. Somewhere in that city, the executive was probably sitting in her office, counting her money and forgetting his name. He smiled to himself. She had told him to get lost. Well, he was certainly lost now. He was flying halfway across the world to a strange city, to spend a year getting punched, kicked, and bruised, all for a movie that might not work. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel lost at all. He felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. He stepped onto the plane and found his seat. As the engines roared to life, pushing the heavy metal bird into the sky, he watched the ground get smaller and smaller. He was leaving his comfort zone behind. He was leaving the safe, predictable world of the dude character. The plane leveled off above the clouds, and Keanu closed his eyes. He knew the hard work was just beginning. The money was fixed, but the movie wasn't made yet. They still had to film it. They still had to convince the world to watch it. The gamble was just starting. But sitting there in the quiet hum of the airplane, surrounded by the unknown, he felt a spark of excitement. He was going to give everything he had. He was going to leave it all on the screen. He leaned his head back against the seat, thinking about the script one last time before the flight took him away from everything he knew. He was ready to wake up in the Matrix. He was ready to see how deep the rabbit hole went. And he was ready to prove that taking a chance on your dreams is worth more than any paycheck in the world. The sun wasn't even up yet when the alarm clock went off. It was 4:30 in the morning in Sydney, Australia. The sky outside the hotel window was still a dark, heavy blue, and the city streets were quiet. Inside the room, Keanu woke up instantly. He didn't hit snooze. He didn't groan and pull the covers over his head. He just swung his legs out of bed and sat on the edge for a moment, staring at the floor. His body felt like it had been put through a trash compactor. Every muscle ached. His ankles throbbed, his knees were stiff, and his neck felt like it was made of rusty metal. This was his new normal. This was what it took to try and save a movie that the studio bosses thought was a joke. He stood up slowly, wincing as his joints popped. He walked into the bathroom and splashed cold water on his face. Looking in the mirror, he saw tired eyes staring back. He wasn't the young, fresh-faced kid from the comedy movies anymore. He looked older, harder. He looked like someone who was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. By 5 a.m., he was in a car heading to the training facility. It wasn't a glamorous gym with shiny mirrors and juice bars. It was a cold, drafty warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The concrete floor was covered in rubber mats, and the air smelled of sweat, dried blood, and leather. This was the boot camp. This was where the magic was supposed to happen, but mostly, it just felt like pain. When he walked in, the fight choreographer was already there. We will call him the Master. The Master was a legend in the world of martial arts cinema. He didn't care about Hollywood egos. He didn't care that Keanu was a movie star. To the Master, Keanu was just a student who wasn't good enough yet. "You are late," the Master barked, even though Keanu was actually 5 minutes early. "Sorry," Keanu muttered, dropping his bag on the floor. "Stretch. Then we start," the Master commanded. For the next 3 hours, it was nothing but conditioning. Stretching, kicking, punching, blocking. They were doing kung fu, jiu-jitsu, and boxing all mixed together. Keanu wasn't just learning how to look like he was fighting. He was learning how to really fight. The Wachowskis, the directors, didn't want fake punches that missed by a mile. They wanted the actors to connect. They wanted it to look brutal and real. Keanu threw a high kick at the pads his trainer was holding. Thwack. The sound echoed through the warehouse. It was a good kick, but not good enough. Again, the Master yelled. "Higher. Faster. You are like a robot. Be fluid." Keanu gritted his teeth and kicked again. Thwack. Again. They did this for hours. Kick after kick, punch after punch. Sweat poured down Keanu's face, stinging his eyes. His shirt was soaked through. His breathing came in ragged gasps. But he didn't complain. He didn't ask for a break. Every time he felt like quitting, every time his muscles screamed at him to stop, he heard the executive's voice in his head. "Get lost. You're wasting my time." He used that anger as fuel. He channeled it into his fists. He imagined he was punching through the wall of her office. He imagined he was kicking down the door she had slammed in his face. Around mid-morning, they moved to the wire work. This was the craziest part. To make the actors move like superheroes, they had to be hooked up to thick cables that hung from the ceiling. The cables were strapped around their waists and legs. Running while wearing wires is harder than it looks. It pulls at your skin. It digs into your hips and ribs. It throws off your balance. They were doing a scene where Keanu had to run up a wall and do a backflip. On the fifth try, Keanu pushed off the wall, but he didn't get his legs high enough. Gravity grabbed him and yanked him down. The wires jerked tight, catching him, but not before he slammed into the mat with a sickening thud. The room went quiet. The trainers rushed over. "You okay?" one of them asked. Keanu lay on his back for a second, staring at the high ceiling of the warehouse. His breath was knocked out of him. His back felt like it was on fire. But he wasn't hurt badly. Just bruised. Again. He nodded, gritting his teeth, and reached out a hand. "Help me up." They pulled him to his feet. He dusted himself off and walked back to the starting mark. "Let's go," he said. "One more time." The master looked at him with a hint of respect in his eyes. Most actors would have gone to their trailer or called their agent. Not this one. After lunch, the training continued, but now it was for the gun work. Handling weapons requires a different kind of discipline. You have to look like you know what you are doing. You have to look dangerous. Keanu spent hours reloading a fake gun, spinning it, drawing it from a holster until the movement was smooth as silk. But the physical toll was starting to add up. About 2 months into training, disaster struck. They were practicing a simple maneuver, just a basic roll on the mats. Keanu went over his shoulder, but his body was exhausted. He landed wrong. There was a loud pop that everyone in the room heard. Pain shot through Keanu's neck and down his arm. It wasn't the usual ache of a hard workout. This was sharp, blinding agony. He dropped to his knees, unable to stand. The trainers rushed him to the hospital immediately. The doctors did X-rays and MRIs. The news was bad. He had seriously injured his neck. He needed surgery. The doctors told him that if he wasn't careful, he could be paralyzed. In a normal world, this would be the end of the movie. The studio would take the insurance money and cancel the whole thing. The executive would probably say, "See, I told you it was too hard." But Keanu refused to stop. He had the surgery, a scary procedure where they fuse the vertebrae in the neck. The recovery was supposed to take months. But the movie had a schedule. They couldn't wait forever. So, Keanu did something incredible. He didn't go home to rest in a fancy bed. He went back to the training hall as soon as he could. He wore a soft neck brace under his costume. When the pain was too much to do the flips, he focused on the hand-to-hand combat. When he couldn't fight, he focused on the script. He pushed his body to the absolute limit of human endurance. The people on the set, the crew, the stuntmen, they all watched him. They saw him limping in the mornings. They saw him icing his knees during lunch. They saw him wince when he moved his head too fast. They saw that he was giving everything he had, blood and sweat, to make this movie work. It made them want to work harder, too. Nobody could slack off when the star of the movie was working harder than anyone else. One rainy afternoon, they were filming a fight scene in a subway set. It was cold and damp. Keanu was fighting an agent, a character who was supposed to be impossible to beat. The scene required them to smash through concrete pillars and crash onto the metal floor. They did the take. Keanu got thrown against a pillar. It was supposed to be a stunt, but the pad slipped. He slammed his elbow directly into the concrete. He heard the bone crack. He fell to the floor, gasping. "Cut!" the director yelled. Keanu stayed down for a moment, his face pale. The pain was making him dizzy. A medic ran over with a flashlight. "Show me your arm," the medic said. Keanu shook his head. "It's fine. It's just a bruise." "Keanu, let me see," the medic insisted. Keanu finally pulled up his sleeve. His elbow was swollen to the size of a tennis ball and turning a deep purple. "You need to go to the hospital," the medic said. "You might have fractured it." Keanu looked over at the director. He saw the worry on the director's face. He saw the look in the eyes of the crew. They were thinking the same thing he was. If he goes to the hospital, they lose the day. If they lose too many days, the studio might pull the plug. "No," Keanu said. "We can wrap up the scene first. We have 15 minutes of light left." "Keanu, your arm." "Wrap it up tight," Keanu said, his voice hard. "Tape it. Then we finish the scene." The medic looked at him, then at the director. The director hesitated, but he saw the determination in Keanu's eyes. He nodded. The medic wrapped Keanu's elbow in layers of tape and compression bandages until it looked like a sausage. It hurt to even bend his arm. But when the director yelled action, Keanu didn't act like he was in pain. He moved with fury. He channeled the agony into the performance. The fight looked more real than ever because the anger and pain on his face weren't acting. It was real life. When they finally yelled cut for the last time, the entire crew broke into applause. It wasn't the fake polite applause they usually gave. It was a roar of respect. Keanu gave a small, tired nod and finally let them help him to the van to see a doctor. Weeks turned into months. The training continued, and the filming began in earnest. The bruises became old friends. The soreness became a background noise that he learned to ignore. He ate, slept, and breathed the Matrix. He stopped being Keanu the movie star and became Neo the warrior. Late at night, after a long day of filming, Keanu would often sit on the balcony of his hotel room, looking out over the harbor. The city lights sparkled on the water. It was beautiful, but his mind was always racing. He thought about the executive back in Hollywood. He wondered what she was doing. He wondered if she had any idea what was happening in this cold, drafty warehouse in Sydney. She had called him soft. She had called him a waste of time. She thought he would fail. He looked down at his hands. The knuckles were scarred and calloused from hitting the pads. His fingernails were dirty from the set. His body was broken and put back together twice. But his spirit was stronger than it had ever been. He took a sip of water and felt the cool liquid go down his throat. He was tired, deep down in his bones, but he wasn't done. The harder it got, the more he knew he was on the right path. Pain is temporary, but a movie like this, a movie that changes everything, that lasts forever. He finished his water and stood up, stretching his sore back. He had to be up in 4 hours. He had to go back to the warehouse. He had to get kicked in the face again. He had to get thrown against walls again. And he couldn't wait to do it. He wasn't fighting just for a paycheck anymore. He was fighting for his life. The long months in Australia had finally come to an end. The warehouse where Keanu had sweated and bled was quiet now. The cameras were packed away, and the green screens were rolled up. He flew back to Los Angeles, leaving the cold Sydney winter behind for the California sunshine, but he didn't feel warm. He felt cold with a strange, quiet anxiety. Making the movie was the hard physical part, but waiting for it to come out was the hard mental part. For a long time, the movie just sat on a shelf. The studio executives, the ones who held the purse strings, were nervous. They had spent a lot of money on this weird project. They watched the first rough cut of the film, and they didn't know what to make of it. It was like nothing they had ever seen before. It was too smart, but also too action-packed. It was philosophical, but also had kung fu. They were confused. Back in the marketing department, the atmosphere was tense. The people whose job it was to sell the movie to the world were scratching their heads. They didn't know how to tell people about a story where computers kidnap humans inside a simulation. They were scared. In meetings, the executives would say things like, "Just sell it as an action movie. Show the guns. Show the explosions. Don't tell them about the philosophy. People won't understand." The executive, the woman who had told Keanu to get lost, was still watching from her high tower. She hadn't changed her mind. She had seen the finished product, or at least parts of it, and she still thought it was a mess. She thought the audience would walk out of the theater scratching their heads, demanding their money back. She was already planning how to spin the failure so she wouldn't lose her job. Then came the night of the first test screening. This is a scary moment for any filmmaker. You take a rough version of the movie and show it to a regular audience in a mall somewhere. You don't tell them what the movie is. You just watch them. If they laugh at the wrong parts, or if they get up to go to the bathroom and never come back, you know you are in trouble. Keanu didn't usually go to these screenings. It was too painful to sit in the dark and listen to people judge your work. But this time, he felt he had to be there. He needed to know if the pain in his neck and the surgery on his leg were worth it. He wore a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes and a simple jacket. He sat in the very back row, slumped down in his seat, trying to look like just another guy in a hooded sweatshirt. The theater was packed with random people, teenagers, couples on dates, older folks looking for something to do on a Friday night. The smell of popcorn and butter hung heavy in the air. The lights dimmed, and the projector started to whir. The movie began. For the first 20 minutes, Keanu's heart was in his throat. The movie starts slow. It introduces the idea of the Matrix, the fake world. It's a lot of talking. In the front row, a teenager was loudly crunching on ice. A few rows down, a man checked his phone. Keanu sank lower in his seat. They hate it, he thought. It's too weird. But then, the scene came. The scene where the main character takes the red pill. The scene where he wakes up in the pod. The horror of the real world was revealed on the big screen. The theater went silent. The ice crunching stopped. The phone was put away. You could feel the entire room lean forward at the same time. Then came the training scenes. The kung fu. The audience gasped. They had never seen fighting like this. It wasn't the shaky, messy fighting from other movies. It was smooth, graceful, and beautiful. They saw Keanu, looking stronger and faster than ever before, moving with a power that captivated them. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. The bullet time. The scene where the character dodges bullets on the rooftop. The camera spun around him while he bent backwards, frozen in time as the air rippled around the bullets. The theater exploded. Literally, exploded. People cheered. They shouted "Whoa!" at the screen. It wasn't a polite applause, it was a visceral reaction of pure excitement. They were seeing magic, and they couldn't believe their eyes. Keanu sat in the back, tears stinging his eyes. He kept his cap pulled low, but a huge smile broke across his face in the dark. He could feel the energy in the room. It was electric. The fear, the doubt, the months of pain, it all washed away in that moment. The movie wasn't a failure. It was a ride. By the time the credits rolled, the audience was buzzing. People stood up, clapping. Two teenagers were high-fiving in the aisle. A couple was arguing excitedly about what the ending meant. It was a computer program. The guy said. No, it was about the mind. The girl argued. They were arguing about philosophy. On a Friday night. In a movie theater. The marketing people were taking notes furiously in the back, their jaws on the floor. They realized they didn't need to hide the smart stuff. The smart stuff was exactly what people loved. Keanu slipped out the side door before the lights fully came up. He didn't want to be seen. He didn't want the praise yet. He just wanted to hold on to that feeling. He got into his car and drove home, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. The release date was set for March 31st. The winter turned into spring. The posters started going up on bus stops and billboards. It was the image of Keanu in the long black coat, holding the guns, looking back over his shoulder. It was an image that promised coolness. But the buzz wasn't just about the poster. It was about the whispers. People were saying, "You have to see this movie. I can't explain it, you just have to go." It was the kind of word of mouth that money can't buy. The night of the premiere finally arrived. It was held at the famous Chinese theater in Hollywood. The red carpet was rolled out, stretching out like a river of velvet. The spotlights pierced the night sky, sweeping back and forth. Keanu walked the carpet, but his mind was elsewhere. He wasn't thinking about the cameras flashing in his face or the reporters screaming his name. He was thinking about the executive. He saw her standing off to the side, near the velvet ropes. She was wearing a sharp dress, holding a glass of champagne. She was talking to a group of other executives, looking unimpressed. She watched Keanu walk by, her eyes cold. She still thought this was a fluke. She thought the test screening was just a fluke. She believed that once the general public, real people, not just a test group, saw the movie, they would reject it. Keanu walked past her, but he stopped. He didn't say anything mean. He didn't gloat. He just looked at her and gave a small, respectful nod. It was a nod that said, "We made it. It's done." She looked at him, her expression unreadable, and gave a stiff nod back. Inside the theater, the atmosphere was different from the test screening. This was filled with Hollywood insiders, critics, actors, producers. This is usually a tough crowd. They are the most cynical people on earth. They sit in their seats with their arms crossed, ready to hate everything. The lights went down. The movie started. This time, Keanu didn't sit in the back. He sat near the front with the directors, the Wachowskis. He held his breath as the opening scenes played. But about 30 minutes in, he felt the room change again. The cynicism evaporated. The tough crowd was hooked. You could hear a pin drop during the quiet moments. You could feel the collective gasp during the action scenes. When the movie ended, there was a pause. A heartbeat of silence. Then, the theater erupted. It wasn't just clapping, it was a roar. It was a standing ovation that went on and on. People were whistling and cheering. The critics, the people who are paid to find faults, were on their feet clapping. The executive sat in her seat. She didn't stand up immediately. She looked around the room at the cheering crowd. She looked at the screen where the credits were scrolling, seeing the massive budget numbers being tallied up. She saw the joy on people's faces. She slowly stood up and clapped, but her face looked pale. She was doing the math in her head. If people loved it this much, if the critics loved it this much, the movie was going to be huge. It was going to be bigger than huge. She realized that she had been wrong. She had tried to kill a masterpiece. She had told a visionary artist to get lost, and he had come back with a revolution. Keanu walked out of the theater into the cool night air. He felt a weight lift off his shoulders that he had been carrying for 2 years. He didn't know the numbers yet. He didn't know how much money it would make. But he knew something more important. He knew that he had proven the executive wrong, not by fighting her, not by yelling back, but by making something beautiful. He took the risk. He took the pain. He took the rejection, and he turned it into art. He looked up at the Hollywood sign in the distance, glowing in the dark. The world was about to change. Tomorrow, the movie would open to the public. The screens would light up all across the country. And the numbers, the cold hard numbers that the executive loved so much, were about to tell a very different story than the one she had written in her head. The spark had caught fire, and now it was a raging inferno. The weekend finally arrived. It wasn't just a normal weekend, it was the weekend that would decide the fate of everything. All over the country, from the biggest multiplexes in New York City to the small drive-ins in the Midwest, the movie posters were up. The black trench coats, the dark sunglasses, the green coat raining down. It looked like a warning, but to the audience, it looked like an invitation. In Hollywood, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Usually, a studio knows by Friday afternoon how a movie is going to do. They have tracking numbers and surveys that predict the future. But for The Matrix, the computers were confused. The numbers were high, but nobody believed them. The studio executives were pacing their offices, waiting for the first batch of box office reports to come in. They were terrified that the movie would open big on Friday and then crash on Saturday because people would tell their friends it was too weird. The executive was in her office, too. She had her shoes off, and her feet were propped up on her expensive desk. She was pretending to work, but she was actually watching the clock. She expected the phone to ring with bad news. She expected to hear that theaters were empty. She had already prepared her speech for the Monday morning meeting. She was going to say, "I told you it was too risky. I told you the star wasn't big enough." But the phone didn't ring with bad news. It didn't ring at all for a long time. Then, her email started to ping. Then the text messages started coming in. Then the assistant burst into the office without knocking. "Ma'am," the assistant said, her eyes wide. "You need to look at the numbers." The executive swung her feet off the desk and sat up straight. "What is it, a disaster?" "I knew it." "No," the assistant whispered, her voice shaking. It's the opposite. Theaters are selling out. They are adding extra showings at 3 a.m. just to keep up. The tickets are gone." The executive turned to her computer screen and pulled up the live box office tracker. She expected to see a small, sad number. Instead, she saw a graph line that was shooting straight up like a rocket ship. It wasn't just doing well, it was breaking records. Friday night came and went, and the money kept pouring in. Saturday was even bigger. Sunday was massive. People didn't just go to see the movie once, they went back to see it again. They took their friends. They brought their parents. They wanted to understand the code. They wanted to see the kung fu. They wanted to see the guy who took a pay cut to make this vision come to life. By the end of the first week, the movie had made more money in 10 days than most movies made in a year. The studio was in shock. The accounting department was working overtime, trying to count the cash. The merchandise, the sunglasses, the coats, the action figures was flying off the shelves. But the real moment came a few weeks later. The executive was sitting in a boardroom for a quarterly review. The lights were dimmed, and a giant screen on the wall displayed the financial report. This was the moment of truth. The screen showed the total domestic box office gross. It was a number that seemed impossible. The screen flashed bright green digits, 241 million. And that was just the beginning. The number kept climbing. It would go on to make nearly $500 million worldwide, but that specific number 241,000,000 was burned into the screen. It was a number that screamed success. It was a number that made the studio bosses rich beyond their wildest dreams. The room erupted in cheers. The chairman of the board was smiling ear to ear, slapping backs and shaking hands. Everyone was looking for someone to hug. Everyone except the executive. She sat in her chair, staring at that giant number on the screen. It felt like the number was staring back at her, mocking her. 241 million, that was the price of her mistake. She had treated the project like trash. She had treated the star like a nobody. And now, that trash was the most valuable thing the studio owned. She looked around the room and saw people celebrating. They were talking about sequels. They were talking about video games. They were talking about a franchise. It made her sick to her stomach. She had held the winning lottery ticket in her hand and she had tried to throw it in the garbage. Meanwhile, Keanu was in a very different place. He wasn't in a boardroom. He wasn't looking at spreadsheets. He was on his motorcycle, riding down the Pacific Coast Highway. The wind was rushing past his ears, and the smell of the ocean filled his lungs. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He was free. He didn't need a spreadsheet to tell him he had done a good job. He had felt it in the theaters when the audience cheered. He had felt it in the quiet moments on set when he knew they had captured something special. He pulled over at a lookout point and turned off the engine. The silence of the ocean was peaceful. He took off his helmet and sat on a large rock, looking out at the water. He thought about the journey. He thought about the rejection, the pain, the surgery, and the fear. He smiled. It wasn't a smile of arrogance. It wasn't a smile that said "I told you so." It was a smile of relief. He had proved to himself that he could do it. He had walked through the fire and come out the other side. He had taken a risk on his gut instinct, and for once, the gamble had paid off. The fame that came with the movie was different this time. Before, people would shout Bill and Ted quotes at him. Now, they looked at him with a different kind of respect. They saw him as a serious actor. They saw him as a person who didn't quit. But Keanu didn't let the praise go to his head. He knew that success is a slippery thing. One day you are on top of the mountain, and the next day you are rolling back down. So, he stayed humble. He kept riding his motorcycle. He kept living in a normal house. He kept being the same guy who gave up his salary to make sure the movie looked good. Back at the studio, things began to change for the executive. While the movie was making millions, her influence was fading. The chairman of the board saw the test screening reports. He heard the rumors about how she had tried to kill the project. He knew that she had signed the paperwork to cancel it before Keanu stepped in to save it. It's hard to be the boss when you are the person who almost said no to the biggest success the company ever had. Slowly, she was pushed to the side. Her office became quieter. Her invitations to the big parties stopped coming. The industry moved on, chasing the next big thing, leaving her behind with her bad decisions and her cynical attitude. One afternoon, she was packing her boxes. She was being moved to a smaller office down the hall, away from the window view. As she taped up a box of files, she found an old script. It was a dusty copy of The Matrix. It was the original draft she had refused to read years ago. She opened it and flipped to the front page. There was a note scrawled on it in handwriting she didn't recognize. It said, "Trust the vision." She looked at the note for a long time. She realized that her problem wasn't that she was smart and the rest of the world was dumb. Her problem was that she had stopped believing in magic. She only believed in numbers and safe bets. She forgot that in the movie business, you have to dream a little bigger than the spreadsheets allow. She closed the script and put it in the recycle bin. She didn't need it anymore. The world had already seen it. Keanu, on the other hand, was just getting started. That $241 million wasn't the end of the story, it was the beginning. It gave him the freedom to choose his own projects. It gave him the power to make other movies that mattered, like the Matrix sequels and other passion projects. But more importantly, it gave him peace of mind. He knew now that when someone says get lost, sometimes the best thing you can do is get lost in your work. He knew that when a door slams in your face, you don't stand there arguing with the wood. You go build your own door. The screen had revealed $241 million, sure. But the real revelation wasn't the money. The real revelation was character. The executive had shown who she was, a person of fear and control. And Keanu had shown who he was, a person of courage and heart. And as the years went by, whenever people would ask him about that time, about the pay cut and the rejection, he would never say a bad word about her. He would never speak the details of the arguments. He would just shrug his shoulders and smile that shy, humble smile. Sometimes, he would say, "You just have to believe. You have to believe in the story, and you have to believe in yourself. And if you do that, the rest of it, the money, the fame, the people saying yes, it all takes care of itself." And with that, he would kick-start his engine and ride off into the sunset, leaving the dust and the doubts behind him, forever the hero who saved the Matrix by saving himself.